Good afternoon, everyone. This is Tim Gleisner, Head of Collections from the Library of Michigan. Today, here with Jeff Morrison with his book, Guardians of Detroit by Wayne State University Press. As always, if you're looking to support the Michigan Notable Books program, I would suggest looking at the opening and closing credits of today's segment, where the Library of Michigan Foundation's contact information can be found. So, and with that, today I'd like to welcome Jeff. Jeff, how are you today?
I'm good, thanks. How are you, Tim?
I'm good. It's good to see you. And folks, this is one of the books, actually this is the only book that the Michigan Notable Books Committee, before we even met, had heard rumblings about, that we had heard around the state of presentations that Mr. Morrison had been doing. The beauty of this book, and if I may say, this is a book really that you could pick up anytime and go to any page, find a building in Detroit and read up on its architectural detail. It's voluminous, to say the least. And so, Jeff, thank you for being here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so first, Jeff, I would just like to know, first of all, what's your background and how did you become a writer?
Well, I have a degree in history with a minor in art from Eastern Michigan University. And you do a lot of writing in history when you're in college. And that was, and I've always read a lot too. So I had some good experience, and I'd taken a few, creative writing classes, that sort of thing, way back when. But I ended up working in advertising and graphic arts for 30 years. And just about every aspect of it, including writing copy, writing commercials, writing ad copy, and all that sort of thing. And then at one point, I found myself unemployed. This would be in spring of 2015. And I was having difficulty finding a new position in graphic design. And so I made my own job, which was creating this book, Guardians of Detroit.
Nice. So
and that's how I found myself being a writer.
So let me ask you a question, or a couple of questions, really. So first of all, you said your degree was in history. Before you went to this book, had you written any other histories other than what you had written in school?
No, not at all.
Not at all. So why do you write? Why do you feel compelled to write now?
Well, I got interested in this subject, and I think of myself more as a photographer than a writer. I feel like I'm stronger as a photographer than as a writer.
Okay.
And I came up with the idea for this book, and it necessitated writing, and I figured that I was up to it. And the more research I did and the more writing I did, felt like I got better and better at it. I actually went back and rewrote, some of the first sections that I wrote, as I felt like I found my voice and found what I was working on and found my rhythm, and it all evolved from there.
So let me ask you, so how did you get the idea for this book? I mean, it's a very intriguing idea, and I'd like you to describe it to folks who have not seen Guardians of Detroit. What was the inspiration for this book?
I had gone down to Detroit. I spent a lot of time in Detroit, going to ball games, going to concerts and things like that. And what really caught my eye one day was we went to a dog show down in Detroit. And we had to park a little bit away from Cobo Hall, and we walked past the old Detroit News Building and saw the sculpture on the old Detroit News Building. And so then a few months later, I came down with the camera and a friend, and we walked around and took pictures of different buildings around the town. And I set those apart. And that was about 10 years ago. And then when I found myself unemployed, one of the things I was doing was organizing my old photographs. And I came across those, and I thought, well, maybe I could do a book based on these. I think people might be interested. And I thought at the time, maybe I could get 100 pages or so and self-publish some small little book that maybe some gift shops or museum stores might be interested in.
Yeah.
And the project grew from there.
So
I ended up with 332 pages. I actually turned in more pages than that to the publisher.
So of the photographs in this book, how many do you think are the original photographs you were taking 7 or 10 years ago?
Only a couple.
Only a couple.
Yeah, only a couple.
Okay, so you get your photographs, you sit down with them. Let me ask, the thing that really surprised me was the amount of detail in this book on each of the buildings, but not only the buildings. The thing that really surprised me is you really looked at the etched figures in buildings, and in many cases, you knew exactly who these figures are. There was one police station that stands out in my mind that you said these were actual police officers. I believe it was police officers. But like,
It was the police commission.
police commission. So how did you find this out? Because I did go back into your notes, and I'm not going to give it away, but I mean, you were going into individual articles on these buildings. Can you describe that research process? Because I know about it somewhat just from my former job as an archivist, but what did you have to do to find all this information on these buildings?
Well, I knew about the Burton Historical Collection at the Detroit Public Library, the main library in downtown Detroit across from the DIA.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my starting point. And I did a lot of research there, and that would lead to other places. And I ended up, there's actually a list in the back of the book, but I ended up going to the Bentley Historical Library at the University of Michigan.
Sure.
The Dow Library, which is spelled D-A-U, the Dow Library and Archive at Historic Trinity Lutheran Church in downtown Detroit.
Okay.
It's on Gratiot. It's one of the buildings featured in the book.
Uh-huh.
They have a huge collection of ephemera, bulletins, anniversary publications, all that sort of thing relating to churches, not just in Detroit, but around the Detroit area, and not just the Lutheran Church, but all different denominations. And that was a huge resource for me when talking about churches.
Wow. So let me ask you, so like, was there a parishioner at one time or a librarian or archivist that you know of that put that all together, or was it over many years that they put that together?
They did it over many years, and I believe the minister that was there, and I think his name might have been Dow, but I'm not certain. The minister that was there before the current minister, he was very involved in building up that library. And I wish I could remember his name, but I can't.
Oh, no, it's fine. And the reason why I get so intrigued is I'm always fascinated by these collections that people put together. Can you speak to any other collections, or what was your experience at the Burton Collection like? Because I've been to the Burton Collection, I've never actually done research in that collection.
That is an interesting thing. It's kind of scattershot in a lot of ways, because a lot of it is, you know, newspaper clippings, like you get the folder on the book Cadillac Hotel. And there's newspaper clippings and different kinds of menus and programs and announcements and mailed advertisements and booklets, you know, that sort of thing, published by the hotel, and just all kinds of stuff. And it's just all kind of there in a folder. And you go through and piece by piece, page by page, and see what you can find.
So what about the Bentley? What was the Bentley like?
The Bentley, mainly what I looked at there was they have a lot of Albert Kahn's papers.
Okay.
And a lot of the blueprints.
Can you describe for the audience who Albert Kahn was?
Albert Kahn is, he's known kind of as the man who built Detroit. If you walk through downtown and point at a building and say it was designed by Albert Kahn, you have 50% chance of being right. I don't know if he designed half the buildings but he did a lot of them, especially like the Fisher Building, the General Motors Building, and he was also very well known for industrial architecture. He kind of revolutionized industrial architecture.
And he was doing a lot of building in the early 20th century, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
That's correct. And by the time he died, you could say, you know, the sun never set on the British Empire. The sun never set on an Albert Kahn building, because he designed buildings around the world.
Okay.
And it was always daytime somewhere where there was an Albert Kahn building.
Nice, nice. I like that analogy. That's really good. So you're going through these files. I have to ask, something that immediately comes to my mind is, obviously with urban renewal and all the problems Detroit has had, did you come across a lot of files of buildings that just were no longer there?
There's a few. there's a few, and some of them were a huge disappointment. The old Detroit Times building
Oh,
was an Albert Kahn design building with a lot of sculpture by Corrado Parducci,
sure.
and that's no longer there. And there used to be the Detroit Stock Exchange,
Okay.
and that had a very cool piece of sculpture on it that you can just see in photographs now.
So,
A couple of other buildings, but the old City Hall and the old Federal Building are two that I really would have liked to have seen in the real world.
sure. So then also, I guess the other question I have is, you're walking the streets of Detroit or you're driving around and you're taking these photos of these buildings. How long did taking the photos take? You said this isn't the original, like there's only a few from that original set that you took. How long did that take you total?
Well, I started working on the book in earnest in fall of 2015.
Okay.
And I turned it in to the publisher in late fall of 2017. So I worked on it as my full-time job during that time.
So for 2 years.
2 years, yeah.
Nice. So,
And it seemed, for a while, it seemed like every time I went downtown to go to a building I knew about, I would find 2 or 3 more buildings along the way.
well, and I just got to describe to folks, I mean, Mr. Morrison here has gotten libraries and police stations and businesses and or business offices and the Maccabee building, fraternal organization buildings. The Maccabees have always fascinated me. And so I looked at that one in all seriousness. So you're in Detroit, and something that really got me was, could this book have been done somewhere else? Could this book have been done? Obviously, these are Detroit buildings, but the things that you were finding, do you think this could have been done in another city?
Well, I think it could. New York comes to mind. Chicago, I think that would probably make a pretty good book. Los Angeles.
Okay.
I've started, some preliminary work on maybe a book about Los Angeles, walking around, taking pictures, and scouting out the buildings. And what makes Detroit special is there was a huge building boom from the late 1800s up until 1930, up until the onset of the Great Depression. And that's when Detroit experienced most of its growth.
Hmm.
And it was at a time when building styles called for architectural sculpture. They were making the transition from old world styles on through Art Deco and then on to the more modern style. So you have this brief period of time with a lot of money, a lot of people with big egos and big ambitions that wanted to build monuments to themselves, and a certain style of building that all led to there being a big concentration of architectural sculpture in Detroit.
So I got to ask, why architectural sculpture? Like, why? Well, first, why did it attract you? And then secondly, what do you think it was that they were trying to do with the sculpture? Because honestly, those police commissioners, I don't remember them being, how can I put this? They didn't seem very flattering to the police commissioners. So, and maybe I'm wrong about that, but why architectural sculpture? Why did they do it, and why does it attract you?
Well, it attracted me. I've just always been interested in it. As a kid, we would drive by or walk by a building, with my family, and I'd see sculpture of some kind in front of the building or on a building, and ask who it was or why it was there. And my dad would make something up and, make up a story about it. And that was, didn't take too long to figure out that wasn't really what was going on. And so, I always have been fascinated with that sort of thing.
Okay.
I think a lot of the reason that there's architectural sculpture on these buildings, some of it has to do just with stylistic responses to the design problem. They're going back to old world solutions, and that, tall buildings, especially the best example they had for that was like Gothic churches.
Okay.
And Romanesque churches and historical buildings. Those were the tall buildings of the earlier times. And they all had this sort of ornamentation on it. And then, again, it has to do with, I think, ego and advertising to a certain extent, like that police station you're talking about. William Maybury. I think his first name is William. Maybury was the mayor of the city of Detroit, and he was the head of the police commission. And that building, it was a police headquarters there on Grand River Avenue, and it was built during his time as mayor. And he became mayor because Hazen Pingree was mayor of the city of Detroit, and he ran for governor. And he won that election, and he thought he could do both, be mayor of Detroit and be governor of Michigan.
Yep.
And the courts decided otherwise, so they had an election, and Maybury won that election. And he was not Pingree's choice. Pingree was a very reform-minded mayor, and Maybury was more of a friend of business sort of a mayor. And so when he built that station, part of it, the design included portraits of the police commissioners, the men on the police commission at that time. And I think that especially the portrait of Maybury is pretty flattering. Some of the others are all right. The one that's not flattering is the one of Hazen Pingree, stuck way off in the corner.
I saw that one. That was good.
I think that has a lot to do with the rivalry between the two men.
So, just talking to you, it got me thinking, and I didn't read it in the book, but were there artists? You obviously have the architects that are adding the sculpture. Was there a set of artists in the city or the region that would just do architectural sculpture like that it was their job?
Yeah, there was a pretty good collection of sculptors. The one that everybody knows is Corrado Parducci.
Okay.
He came here from New York in 1925. He had been working for Albert Kahn before that on different buildings. And just about any building, I said you could point at any building and say that's an Albert Kahn building. You can point at any building and say that has sculpture on it and say that's Corrado Parducci's work, and you have like a 90% chance of being right, because just about every building that went up in Detroit between 1925 and into the 1930s had Parducci's work in it, on it, or both. He lived at his studio. He would stay there working long hours all week long, and usually slept at the studio, and then maybe would go home one day of the weekend to see his family.
So you're going to tell me I should read the book or have someone else read the book, but I have to ask, did these artists have free reign as to what they put on as sculpture on the building? Like, would the architect say, Parducci, go ahead, put these faces on there, or you have free reign to put whatever you want on that building?
It depended on the buildings. Like, for example, Trinity Episcopal Church, which that photo on the cover of the book is from Trinity Episcopal Church. Those were based on historical drawings. James Scripps, who paid to build the church, he wanted to build an historically accurate church based on Gothic churches in southern England from like the 13th and 14th centuries. Mm-hmm. And he had architects and historians traveling around and doing drawings and sketches of these churches around the area. And then they brought those back, and they're very historically accurate. But for example, the sculpture on the book building, there's 4 figures that are of historical figures, but there's also faces in the keystones over the windows. Those were most likely based on, the plans called for faces to be there, but the faces themselves were most likely based on friends and family of the sculptors that created them.
Really? That's cool. That's very cool. So let me ask you this. What was the hardest part of this whole experience writing this book?
Just tracking down who did what, because the architectural sculptors, they were considered more, contractors or craftsmen. Their work was not viewed as that, as art. It was just something that was being added onto the building. And a lot of records were lost about who did what on which building. And most of them didn't sign any of their work. Parducci said he never signed any of his work on any of the buildings he worked on. He said, who would see it? The birds? So, very few people signed their work. So it's very hard to determine who did all this work.
So did you ever come across any blueprints in your searching? I'm guessing Albert Kahn, there must have been some, but did you come across on any of the other architects at all?
Not so much. One of the interesting thing about Albert Kahn's blueprints is he had such faith in Parducci that after a while, in some cases, he would not draw out exactly what he wanted in that area. Just like there'd be a blank spot on the blueprint and it would say Parducci. And he trusted Parducci to come up with a model and a sketch of, that would suit the building and that he would approve.
That's fantastic. So, and again, this is all municipal and commercial architecture. How would you define this work? How would you define Guardians of Detroit? Do you call it a straight history? Do you think it's more of a survey? How would you define this work, Jeff?
I like to think of it as a documentary in a lot of ways. I think it's really important to preserve these buildings. And in lieu of preserving the buildings, preserve photographs of the buildings.
Sure.
A lot of buildings, we were lucky in Detroit that more buildings weren't torn down. A lot of buildings would have been torn down, but they didn't have the money to do it.
Really?
The book building Cadillac Hotel is a great example of that.
I mean, I always knew that about the houses of Detroit, residences and things like that. But even like the major buildings downtown, they just didn't have the money.
Yeah, the book Cadillac Hotel, it was a derelict at one time. And they wanted to tear it down. They didn't have the money to do so. And then somebody bought it and restored it. And now it's one of the finest hotels in the area.
Yeah, very much so. It's a beautiful building.
There was a huge movement to tear down buildings in Detroit because the business leaders felt that one of the reasons, now people were leaving after World War II to move to the suburbs because of highways and cars and transportation, and they could build a nice big house with a yard, there was a lot of room to do that. There were a lot of reasons why people were leaving Detroit.
Sure.
But one of the reasons the business leaders felt it was because Detroit looked old. So they wanted to tear down or hide some of the older buildings. That's the main reason why Old City Hall was torn down.
Right.
Was it looked old.
So let me ask, so is there someone who reads through your work before you submit it for publication?
My wife will occasionally read through it, but mostly no, it just, I read it, and I think I probably read everything in the book 20 or 30 times before it went to the publisher. And then they have an editor too.
So I asked you before, I mean, just from the volume of research you did, and folks, I have to say, again, working in a city library in Grand Rapids and knowing people like Jeff, seeing the amount of research that went into this book, there were buildings that you took out. How did you decide which buildings made the final cut in this book?
Number one was which buildings had the best variety.
Okay.
And when you say the final cut, I assume you're talking about the front part of the book with the
yes, not the back. So there's an appendix,
buildings.
folks, that Jeff's talking about that has like little miniature descriptions of some of these buildings
with little postage stamp photos.
Yes. So how did you? Okay, yeah, the ones that were fully fleshed out. How did you decide on those buildings?
They were the buildings that I felt had the most interesting sculpture, the best variety of sculpture, and in some cases, the best stories related to them. Several of the buildings in there, they made the cut just because once I started doing the research, the stories were of such interest to me. It was like, well, I'm not cutting this one.
So I have to ask about one that I looked for deliberately because I was out in Belle Isle one time. It was an Albert Kahn memorial, I believe. He had made a memorial out there. Can you describe that building that he had done out on Belle Isle?
Would that be the lighthouse, the Livingston Lighthouse?
There was the lighthouse. Yes, there was the lighthouse. And then there was also, I thought, a memorial, but I could be wrong maybe. But what was Albert Kahn doing out there? Describe the lighthouse. I have seen the lighthouse as well.
The lighthouse is at the north end of the island. You cannot drive to it. You can see it briefly from the road,
Right.
but not for very long because there's a hill in the way. And you have to walk out to it. It is made of marble, and it is the only Art Deco lighthouse in North America, the only marble lighthouse in North America.
So wait,
And there's some Geza Marodi, who is the sculptor, a Hungarian sculptor that came to the United States and was hired by Kahn to work on the sculpture and the murals and mosaics inside the Fisher Building. He had a huge hand in designing, helping to design the Livingston Memorial Light.
so let
And
me
Kahn
ask
was
you,
the architect that built it.
is that whole lighthouse? Because I have walked to that before. Is that all marble?
Well, yeah, the light room at the top of the lighthouse is bronze, and then the whole spire of the lighthouse, the body of the lighthouse, is marble.
I could go on for hours with you about this. So let me ask, like, who paid for that? Who actually, was it the city of Detroit?
I believe it was. No, I think it was. It was a memorial to Livingston. He was Sailor Bill, they called him, William Livingston, and he was involved in a lot of maritime business in the Detroit area and in Michigan, responsible for making better sea lanes, dredging of the St. Clair River and the Detroit River to make better sea lanes through. He promoted the locks up at Sault Ste. Marie, and I believe there was a maritime institute of some time based in Ohio, I think, that helped raise money to build that lighthouse.
Wow.
I don't think it was built by the city of Detroit.
Okay. Okay. So let me ask, all these sources, then you're going into newspaper articles, you're going to different libraries. How hard was it to find these individual sources on all these buildings?
It depends. Some it was quite easy. Some were right there at the Burton. You'd pull out a folder and there would be everything you need to find out. One of the things that was most interesting to me is, what does the sculpture mean? What does it represent? Beyond finding out who did it. But, it's not always really clear, and it's not always definite. And every once in a while, like for the sculpture on the Fisher Building or on the Rackham Educational Memorial, you'd find a booklet that was published at the time the building was constructed that says, this program of sculpture was done by so-and-so, and this piece represents this, and this piece was done to represent that, and so on. And you'd have everything in perfect detail.
Right.
And then sometimes there would be not a clue, and you just have to keep digging and digging until you found something.
That's amazing. Because, yeah, that's the thing.
Sometimes you just stumble across stuff. I was looking at the Kahn Library, the Albert Kahn Library at Lawrence Tech.
Right.
Which they donated Albert Kahn's personal library to Lawrence Technological Institute, Lawrence Tech University, and they reconstructed his library in the basement of their library. And I was looking for information about the sculpture on the Maccabees building, which you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
There's some really fascinating work on there, and I was trying to find something definitive, something definite about those soldiers around the outside. And I came across minutes of a meeting that was held with other professionals, which was something they had started doing when they were going to build a major building. They would have a big meeting with a group of professionals, and they would discuss all the possible problems and ramifications of building this building and the best way to do it, and talk about what they wanted to do and how to go about it. And then they would all chip in their 2 cents worth. And it was in this piece that I found out, well, the Maccabees building was almost torn down when it was halfway done, because there was a plan to widen Woodward. Wow. And they were told to build it a certain amount of feet set back from Woodward Avenue.
Yeah.
And halfway through, the inspector came through and they found out that, well, the one side, the one corner was the proper amount of room away from Woodward, but the other corner was not. And so they condemned the building, and they said, you're either going to have to change it or tear it down and start over. And, of course, Albert Kahn and the Maccabees said, well, we didn't do this on purpose. It was an accident, but, can't you let us do this?
Right.
Because, we're so done. And they eventually got a variance to leave the building the way it was. But I came across the minutes of this meeting, where Albert Kahn is saying, we should square off this lot and build a square building instead of an odd-shaped building. And that'll interfere with the wider Woodward plan. Not in so many words, but that'll interfere with the wider Woodward plan, but I can probably make that okay.
So let me ask about, okay, so the Maccabee building, and that's a big building. And
yeah.
Where did you find all these minutes? Did the Maccabees, it's a fraternal organization, or was, now it's an insurance company. Where does that exist?
It was in the Albert Kahn Library at the Lawrence Tech University. And I just stumbled across it. They had the library opened up as part of the Albert Kahn seminar that they hold there every other year. And had tours of the library, and I was looking through the library, and I saw a book on the shelf that said, the Maccabees building meetings, meeting minutes or whatever. And I pulled that out and started looking at it. And then I went back later and dug some more, and lo and behold, that's what I found. Like I said, I was just hoping to find out information about the sculpture, and I found out so much more. And there's all this newspaper clippings from the time. Newspapers.com is a great resource too.
Okay.
They have the Detroit Free Press is all digitized on there.
Yeah.
And I found all kinds of stories in the paper about the going back and forth with the city council about what to do about them being over the line.
What a gold mine. So I know you've toured around the state, or at least a good swath of the state already, telling people these stories about your book. And I remember when I first heard about you, you had come to Lansing, to the Lansing Historical Society in the Library of Michigan.
Yep.
So when you're going around the state, do you meet a lot of former Detroiters who are like, I remember that building? Because again, it's that sense of place about Detroit, Detroit is the city for Michigan. Do you find a lot of people like that around the state?
I do. One of the best parts about doing talks around the state is when people come up afterwards to talk and say, well, I worked in this building, or my husband or my father worked in this building. And I always loved going there, and I remember seeing all these different things. And as a matter of fact, I had done a presentation while I was still working on the book at one of the local libraries, and somebody came up, no, this was at the Albert Kahn seminar, and somebody came up and told me about the Detroit Times building and the piece from the sculpture from the Detroit Times building that is in the Belle Isle Conservatory. And that's how I found out about that. And that was fortunately in time to make it into the book. That's in the back of the book. There's one piece of sculpture from the old Detroit Times building.
Amazing. So let me ask you, so where's the farthest place you've given a talk so far in the state of Michigan?
So far, I think it's Lansing.
Oh, okay. All right.
I was scheduled to go to Petoskey and I think Alpena, or somewhere up by Alpena.
Yes.
And of course that got canceled because of the current COVID crisis, but hopefully at some point I'll be able to do that and visit some of these places eventually. And plus I still, with working on the book, I'm working on a book about architectural sculpture in the rest of Michigan now.
Yeah.
So I am traveling all over the state, getting photos of different buildings.
I asked you before the interview, where is the best concentration of buildings? Could you tell our viewers where the best concentration of buildings are?
I would say Saginaw and Bay City area,
okay.
Grand Rapids, Jackson, Lansing, East Lansing and Lansing have quite a bit.
Okay.
University of Michigan and Ann Arbor have quite a bit.
Okay.
So yeah, there's a lot of great places, and then there's a lot of small towns in the middle of nowhere that have one building with something really cool on it. So
do you find yourself driving around and you just run into these buildings, or do you read about it in some source and go, I got to go to that town? Like, say Owasso, and I got to go to Owasso for the day to go check out that building?
It's both. It's both. As a matter of fact, like I knew about an old county courthouse in Corunna. I think it's the Shiawassee County Courthouse in Corunna.
Sure.
And I got out of the car, got out of the car and looked in the building right next to where I parked, had these great little faces on it. That, you know, nobody had said anything about it. I had no idea. Or same thing with, I believe it's Bay City, with the First Presbyterian Church in Bay City. I knew about the Masonic Temple, and I went and parked at the Masonic Temple and took some pictures. And then kitty corner from the Masonic Temple, I noticed this old church, and it's like a Gothic style and looks like it might be interesting. And I go over and wow, there's some great stuff on it, and that'll definitely be in the new book.
Nice, nice. So when can people anticipate that book coming, do you think?
That is probably not coming out until hopefully spring of 2022.
Okay, and so I have to ask, with the current crisis, the state of the world with COVID, do you find your work being affected at all? The limitation in travel or being able to get into places to examine the sources on these buildings?
Yeah, travel is limited, obviously. And, you know, now you have a little more opportunity now to travel and take some pictures. You know, it's all outdoors, and typically there aren't that many people around.
Sure.
So it's fairly safe. But there's also, most of the libraries and archives are closed. So I can, in a lot of cases, I can write to the library, you know, email the library or the archivist, and most people are very willing to help out. I do a lot of that research through email.
Nice. So Guardians of Detroit, why that title? How was that title chosen?
Well, it just kind of came to me while I was working on the book. That was one of the first things that came to me. Like the first month or so when I was working on it, I was trying to think of what to call it. And I first thought of like Facing Detroit or Faces of Detroit or something like that, but it didn't really catch the mood. And I kind of realized as I was walking around taking pictures, first of all, you have a lot of Guardian figures like on the Guardian building or on other buildings where there's, you know, like a sentry with a sword standing over the door, or lions over the doors. And these are all Guardian figures. And then you have all these other grotesques and gargoyles that just kind of looking down on everybody as they walk past. And it felt like they were kind of looking out for the city, looking out for the people of the city, and Guardians of Detroit just kind of came to me.
So you've already alluded to a bunch of the buildings, but what is maybe your favorite piece, your favorite vignette of a building in this book?
I usually answer that question by saying the next one. I get really excited when I find a new building and start taking pictures of it and start, you know.
Fair enough.
But I would have to say in this book, I think Trinity Episcopal is, for me, one of the buildings that is the epitome of architectural sculpture, because there's like 160 different pieces of sculpture on the outside of that building. Another one would be the Fisher Building, just because there's so much sculpture on the building, and a lot of it is, you know, like 33 stories above ground level, and you need a telephoto lens or binoculars to be able to see it really well.
So I have to ask as an amateur, I'm not a photographer. Would people ever stop you and ask you what you were doing when you were taking photographs with a telescopic lens 30 stories up?
Yeah, they'll want to know, is that building being bought? Or they'll ask, you know, what's going on. I'll tell them about the book, and a lot of times they'll tell me stories about working in the building or someone they knew in the building, or things of that nature, or how much they like the building. Or sometimes people will stop and say, you know, they'll see me looking up and pointing the camera at something, and they'll look and they'll say, wow, I never noticed that before.
Oh, cool.
Other times people will say, yeah, I love those things up there, and it doesn't seem like anybody ever sees them. I'm glad to see somebody doing something about this, you know, bringing them to a wider audience.
Very nice, very nice. So how did it feel to be selected as a Michigan Notable Book Author?
It was really exciting. I got the call, and I was smiling for the rest of the day. It's just, it's something that never occurred to me when I was working on the book, that it would be that well received. And it's nice, and it also is nice because it means more people will see the book and more people will be influenced to maybe have some feelings about preserving these buildings.
So let me ask, kind of a nice segue to that last question. Why do you think somebody should read Guardians of Detroit?
Well, I think if you have any interest in the people that built Detroit or the history of the city of Detroit, there's a lot of stories about these people, and I think you'll enjoy that. I think they should appreciate the pictures. Hopefully, if you like pictures of unusual things, there's a ton of them in this book. And I also think that it helps to raise awareness of architectural, historic preservation and awareness of what we have and some of what we're so fortunate to have here in the city of Detroit and around Michigan now as I work on the next book. But raising awareness of architecture in general and architectural sculpture in particular, I think that is probably the best thing that can happen from this book being published.
Very nice. Well, folks, Guardians of Detroit with Mr. Jeff Morrison from Wayne State University Press. That's who we've been talking to today. Jeff, thank you very much for being with us today and illuminating your work. And we look forward to seeing your next book in a year or two on Lost or Guardians of Michigan or Lost Michigan. And folks, just remember, if you want to support the Michigan Notable Book Program, just remember that the Library of Michigan Foundation can be reached in the contact information at the beginning and ending credits of today's segment. Jeff, thank you so much for being with us today.
And if I could just mention, if anybody has any questions or comments or wants to know anything about the book, you can contact me through the website at guardiansofdetroit.com.
Very nice. Well, Jeff, thank you.
I love to hear from people.
Fantastic. Jeff, thank you for today.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.